well, I would like to welcome everyone to Executive Voices, Executive Presence in a Virtual World on this beautiful spring afternoon. I'm Amanda Raker-Kimmelman, and I'm going to go over some logistics to make everyone feel comfortable before we get started with the main program. So first of all attendees are muted, and you will be muted throughout the presentation. Not to worry, you're also not on video, so only our panelists today and speakers are on video, so you can sit back and relax in that regard. We are recording, and we plan to share a video out on the Executive Voices website and in a follow-up email after the event, so be on the lookout for that. If you do drop today, we understand that sometimes connectivity can be an issue. Not to worry, just go ahead and dial back in and rejoin us. That's not a problem at all. And time permitting this afternoon, we are going to have a Q&A portion of the program at the end today. And we'll ask that you submit your questions and comments through the Q&A button that's on your toolbar. So if you have questions or comments for our panelists or our moderator, feel free to submit them in the Q&A button. So go ahead, grab a drink, sit back and relax and enjoy the conversation. And at this time, I'd like to introduce Amy Bittner, my friend and colleague, to get us kicked off. Amy.
Thanks, Amanda. I do have a drink, but I'm afraid it's not very exciting. But welcome, everyone. My name is Amy Bittner. I'm with Mercer here in Denver, Colorado. And for the last 2 years, along with Amanda, I have served as an advisor for the Executive Voices events. And today I have the honor of introducing you to the founder of Executive Voices and our panel moderator, Anna Conrad. Now, I met Anna about 10 years ago when we were launching the Rocky Mountain Executive Forum together. Anna, I'm sure you remember that fun venture. And over the years, we have served on multiple boards and committees together. And she is always the first to ask, how can I help? What can I offer? Who can I introduce you to? And so assisting her with this initiative was really a no-brainer. Now, in my role at Mercer, I meet with companies every day of all industries, sizes, different stages in their maturity. And I will tell you, when I ask them what are their initiatives for the next 3 to 5 years, even with the interruptions caused by the pandemic, leadership development continues to be a top priority. And this could be upskilling individual contributors to become effective people managers. It could be developing the next generation of leaders internally, or even planning a true C-level succession plan. And the biggest barrier that they share with me often is that they don't have the internal resources to commit to such a large, ongoing, and let's be honest, permanent initiative. And this is really where Anna Conrad comes in and really serves as an extension to my clients' teams. Now, Anna is the CEO of Impact Leadership Solutions, and for the last 14 years, she has coached hundreds of people and future leaders at some of the most respected companies in the country and honestly, the world. She does this through one-on-one executive coaching. If you're interested, get on the wait list. Leadership development programs, team effective sessions, and new leader assimilation and transition consulting, which I think is one of the most fascinating solutions that she shares with us. In addition to being the CEO of Impact Leadership Solutions and the founder of Executive Voices, Anna has served on the boards of Women's Beam Project, Project Safeguard, the Women's Energy Network, and she has authored and published 2 books that you can get on Amazon that introduce a reader to what to expect when you're working with an executive leadership coach. Really great introduction to how to work with a coach. It's safe to say that if you're interested in leadership development, you are in very good hands with Anna. And I encourage all of you after this program today to reach out to her and see how she might be able to help you on your journey. Now, Executive Voices was born from Anna's belief that becoming a leader and leadership is not a destination, but a dynamic, evolving, long journey, and one that is best traveled with the company of others. And so in that spirit, I would like to turn this over to our facilitator and our conversation moderator, Anna Conrad, to introduce this afternoon's leadership topic and all of our star panelists who have generously offered to share their wisdom with us today. So with that, Anna, I'm going to turn this over to you to introduce our topic and our panelists.
Well, gosh, Amy, I was not expecting that wonderful welcome. So thank you. I really appreciate that. And by the way, for those of you who do not know Amy Bittner or Amanda Raker Kimmelman, they work for Mercer. And not only do they know like everybody in town, but they're experts in all things people as it relates to benefits, compensation, and retirement. All those fun, sexy things. Now, as Amy mentioned, I spend the majority of my days helping leaders grow and develop through executive coaching and leadership programs. One of the most requested topics is indeed executive presence, and that's why we've decided to focus on it today. In my extensive research and experience and readings, I've identified three key areas of executive presence, and Amanda just showed it to you. When we talk about executive presence, it can usually be boiled down to projection, business competence, and then integrity. And in this virtual world, especially, maintaining executive presence is really hard, which is why we have brought together three leaders today who face this challenge every day. And it's my hope through their stories and their techniques, you'll see how they inspire others and they make people want to follow them. As you listen to them, challenge yourself to see where you excel and where you're strong, and also, of course, where you have room for development. So let's go ahead and introduce our speakers. Our first panelist today is Carl Lukács. He's the new CFO of Noodles and Company. Well, first of all, we need to welcome Carl to the Colorado business community. Actually, he's been here in a full 2 weeks. So he was lucky enough. I think we've gone through two snowstorms, and I assured him that it'll end soon. I don't know if he believes me, but I assured him that. Carl grew up in Tokyo and he has moved here from New York City, where he worked for Abercrombie and Finch as well as Equinox. Super exciting news, even more exciting than Carl moving here, is that he and his hubby are expecting twins to add to their family. They have a 2-year-old boy and they're expecting twins any day now. So, really exciting. Our next panelist is Crystal. Crystal Heater, actually, we've gone from somebody who's a recent transplant to somebody who's homegrown. Crystal has been lucky enough to grow up in Colorado. She actually grew up in the Berkeley neighborhood, which is pretty cool. She went to the Colorado School of Mines. For the last 10 years, she ran the commercial business at Tallgrass. Recently, she's been promoted to COO of Tallgrass Energy and is over all of engineering and operations. So yay for Crystal for finally getting up there, which is wonderful. She deserves it. And also for representing women so well in that company in the industry. Our final panelist is Kristen Blessman. Kristen is CEO and president of the Colorado Women's Chamber. One of the things I love about Kristen is her passion and her energy, which you will see. Before joining the Women's Chamber, she was the chief marketing officer for the Goodwill Industries of Denver. Um, she was she was focused on trying to make thrifting cool again, and she also started new lines of business. You'll hear as she speaks that she has a real gift for turnaround, and you'll hear how she uses executive presence for that. And she's also using it to really change the image and the function of the Women's Chamber. So, Amanda, I think we're going to go ahead and get started with our panelists. And we're actually going to start. I'm going to ask all three of you to share with us your own personal story, your own personal career path. So, Carl, would you mind going first?
I'm happy to. And Anna, thanks so much for welcoming me so warmly to the Denver community and to the team here. Anna started with giving a little bit of details about my career background, but was also able to share some things that through a virtual environment or through what's changed over the past year, I think a lot of people are more comfortable sharing, and that's their personal life and their own personal story. I'm so proud to share that I have an amazing husband. I'm very proud to share that I have a wonderful 2-year-old. I'm pregnant with twins. I have a great family. These are things that I think over the past year, we've been able to be more forthcoming, and it's been able to connect us in a digital world that I think is going to have long legs in the future. But more specifically on my career, I did grow up in Tokyo, Japan. I went to school in DC, but spent a bulk of my career in investment banking, where I was very client focused. It was a very fast paced, analytical, financial environment that I really thrived on at the time. And one of my major pivotal moves in my career was going from that financial advisory and services side into the corporate finance side when I moved really across the wall to go work for Abercrombie and Fitch in the finance group. And then since then, really found a very good home in corporate finance. Went to Equinox, where I led a finance department. We grew a business from 1 brand to 13 brands, tremendous amount of growth. And most recently, really one of the more exciting elements of my career is I've made a step into a CFO role. I'm a first-time CFO. We're a public company. We have a tremendous amount of opportunity. It's a cultural-led organization, and Noodles is really an exciting place to be right now. So that's where I am. Very excited to be here in Denver, and looking forward to speaking with you all today.
It's wonderful. Thank you. Crystal, how about you?
Thank you, Anna. As Anna said, I'm Chief Operating Officer at Tallgrass. I did grow up here in North Denver, went to School of Mines, gained a degree in chemical engineering. I began working for the predecessor to my current company 22 years ago in 1999, have just gone with those transitions. And I worked in the engineering project management area for about 10 years, and then I moved over to commercial business for 10, 11 years, and then have now, with my recent position, have come back over the technical arena. I am married to my high school sweetheart, so we're going on about close to 30 years. So I don't have any commitment fears, just put that out there. I have 2 wonderful sons who are 10 and 8, who I just adore, of course. My journey with executive presence started very early on. I entered into the Inroads internship program right out of high school that was for minority students, and started interning at Texaco and various other opportunities, and spent really every weekend and break putting a suit on and going to trainings and seminars and various mock examples of executive presence. So that was really an awesome opportunity that I had at that time. And then School of Mines really reinforced some of that. As many of you know, it's a challenging school. I actually tried to leave after my sophomore year, but I had a full scholarship and decided I needed to just stick it out. The professors are tremendously difficult. And one example I wanted to give was during field session, you get up to, as a team, present your work on the labs that you're conducting, and you put your slides up. And at that time, I'm old enough that they were still floppy, sheets that you had to project on the wall, not electronic. And if your graphs had the tick marks crossing the axis, you immediately failed. So those were the rules. Your graphs could only have them inward, and they just said, sit down, you failed. So I learned very early on, not only attention to detail, but how to face failure and harsh realities with composure and poise and continue on. So I'm just happy to be here and look forward to the balance of the conversation.
Wow, thank you. And what I love about the 2 of you is the different experiences you have, not only, of course, different industries and, not only where you guys grew up, which makes a huge difference, but the fact that, Crystal, you grew up professionally in one company. And Carl, you've had exposure to different things. So I'm really looking forward to hearing how both of your experiences both add to and detracted from what you consider executive presence. So thank you. All right, Kristen, would you mind sharing your story with us?
Sure. I'm humbled to be here with both Carl and Crystal. You're so accomplished, and just feel honored and privileged to be here with you, and Anna, you as well. So thanks so much for having me. And it's interesting, Carl talked a little bit about, being open and personal during COVID. And I did a TED Talk during COVID about, my story and how I was raised. And it's kind of funny how full circle things come from life and career, and how it shapes you. And I was raised in a pretty, very loving, but pretty crazy Irish Catholic family that, had a lot of addiction present growing up. And it's interesting how that's led me on my path. I didn't wind up in nonprofit because I have a bleeding heart, and people kind of look at me funny when I say that. But I wound up working for large nonprofits because there's so many in Colorado. And I started my career out in higher education, which is nonprofit, but very large and profit generating, which is what brought me to Goodwill. But I always tell the story of, once the mission got me at Goodwill, it hooked me. And so that's how I found my way into leadership in nonprofits, because I think, growing up in the situation that I grew up in, I had to go through a lot of change and growth to get to where I am. And that's what drew me to nonprofits, because they change so much. They don't just change within the organization and the growth that they create, they change people and they change the path of people's lives. And so that's what drew me to working at Goodwill. They had an amazing business model of people, profit, planet. They make a profit. They're a very large organization. They're actually almost 100 million worldwide. And so they do make a profit, but what they do with those profits, and Amanda knows this because her and I work together at Goodwill, is absolutely incredible. They have a green aspect of their business, of course, because there's so much recycling that's done. But I got hooked on the fact that they do workforce development for people who are struggling. And I saw the change that that made. And it was when I was at Goodwill that the CEO sort of tapped me and said, you could be a CEO someday. And I did what a lot of women do. And I said, I just got divorced. I'm a single mother. There's no way in hell I'm going to be a CEO. And he kind of looked at me like I was a little bit crazy. I gave you the golden ticket here. I'm telling you, you can do this. And you're arguing with me. He's like, I'm not sure what you're talking about. I'm going to get you a mentor and a coach, which, testament to what Anna does. So you can kind of talk through some of those barriers that you're seeing, but I'll give you the skills to do it. And it's interesting. I always tell this story. The very first meeting with my mentor, she said, you want to be a CEO of what? And I said, I don't know, an organization like the Women's Chamber. They seem like there's a lot of opportunity there. And 3 years from that date, she sent me the job at the Women's Chamber. And I thought, well, I have to apply, right? She sent it to me and she's worked with me for 3 years to do this. I probably won't get it, but I have to apply because she's helped me so much. And lo and behold, here I am. And, once again, the gift of having to navigate chaos. When I came to the Women's Chamber, we were in a pretty tough spot financially. At one point, we only had 4 months of revenue before we were going to go out of business. And so we sought rapid turnaround, and now today are flourishing. We have a great membership base, and I just learned so much about myself during that period. And I'm so thankful for the journey and the gift to be able to do it.
Wow. And we're thankful that you actually stuck your neck out there and decided to do it. So thank you. Well, and so Kristen, I want to continue ask with the next question with you. As you know, the title of this event is Executive Presence in a Virtual World.
Mhm.
Go back in time, go back before COVID, and want you to think about what did executive presence mean to you at that time? And then the second part, which I know you're not supposed to ask two-parted questions, but I'm going to. The second part is, what does it mean to you now in this new world that we have?
Well, first of all, I think executive presence for me, and, Carl alluded to this, there was a layer in between, an executive and then, in the case of the Women's Chamber, members and individuals that you work with and people in the community and the face that you put on of strength, right? And I think it's impossible. It was impossible, and I think will be moving forward, to have that layer in between you and the individuals that work with you and the customers that you serve. When we hit COVID, especially for women in business, I mean, we all know this, so many women have left the workforce because of COVID, and women are really struggling right now. So I was surrounded by that daily. And I think the gift for me is what executive presence meant was being vulnerable and authentic. And we called every single one of our members to check in and make sure that they were okay. I've been on phone calls where there were tears and counselor, and also having to let my employees know, we're going to be okay. I am here for you. Don't worry. You know, we talk about like on Zoom calls and you get to know people on a deeper level, right? There's kids in the background and dogs and houses, and you see things and you get a window into people's personality that for me, obviously, since I'm willing to be so vulnerable and share my story, is so refreshing and I think connects us on a much deeper level.
I think that's wonderful. Wonderful. Crystal, would you mind addressing that same question? What did it look like for you before, and then what does it look like now?
Absolutely. I mean, the attributes were there before as they are now. It's really just grown, I think, beyond how it looked at that time, which was inside the brick and mortar of our office buildings, where the opportunities to impart your influence and your expectations was just readily there. And that has changed so much where we're all home and have been home for most of a year now, and you have to make the additional effort to have that contact. And I make an effort to be on video in meetings I'm on, even if I'm the only one, just so that people are seeing that there's a live person on the other side, that they are seeing my reactions to what they're saying. They know I'm paying attention. I think that has become one of the hardest parts of the virtual environment is the distraction. If I'm not on video, I find myself multitasking and being distracted. So that has really changed quite a bit. We've done some things around town halls, and we tried that effort, but it was similar to this format, which is appropriate here. But for the company, there was no interaction with the team. So then we went to, in the fall, smaller, like 20 different team meetings, which was a lot of effort on the part of the executive teams, but we were able to have two-way discussions and really reach our people and make sure that they were okay, and impart that we were having the same fears and exhaustion with all of the pandemic and what is going on. And so that it's just been an extra challenge to really impart that executive presence in this environment.
So I'm kind of going to throw a little curveball at you, and I apologize, but I just can't help myself. With your new role then, so not only are we now in COVID times, but you've also taken a newer, it's not completely new, but a newer role. What have you had to do differently with regards to executive presence and being that type of a leader?
Um, it's been very challenging, I'll say. So it's been about 9 months, most of which has been home. But I've had to make the effort more so than I would previously. If I were in the office, I could just pop into meetings and get to know folks. And to be honest, it's still a challenge. I'm very eager for everyone to gain comfort in getting back to the office so that I can meet this broader team. And it's a very large team that I have now. So, but we have tried to reach out and establish those connections. But until we can return to the office, and really for me, about 500 of the employees on my team are in the field, and so I need to be getting out there. And I think we're on the cusp of being able to do that and build that relationship. So it's still feels like we're in low gear. I'm in low gear in that aspect.
Are you noticing people responding well when you're on video camera, even if they're not? Do you notice more people coming on video camera if you're on video?
I do, and at least speaking, and it's that's the real downside to videos. People can kind of hide, and there lots of folks do that in meetings, even they don't speak up. But at least we're giving every opportunity to have that interaction.
I love that. Thank you very much. And Carl, you and I have had some good conversations about executive presence. What do you think about this pre-COVID and now?
Sure. So two-part question. So I'll answer both of those. First, when you think about pre-COVID, I come from an analytical background. Executive presence, I've always wanted to just bear hug it and say, how do I measure this? How do you take something like gravitas and put a measurement or be able to analyze it? How can you analyze values? Why is this resonating and this is not? So looking at that more and more and deeper, I've really learned, a couple things looking at what executive presence was is one, you can measure it. It is challenging to do it, but there are different areas about how you come across as an individual and how others see you that you can put some sort of scale on. The second thing I learned is you can improve upon it. If you see things that you would like to change, you can improve upon it. The improve upon it comes from just a conscious effort about how you do present yourself. And an understanding of that comes from simply talking about it, hearing feedback from your peers. In my decade on Wall Street, we had 360 reviews of every individual. I heard from the top to the bottom, all across the board, what people thought of me and what I thought of others. There was no better way to just ingrain yourself in how you come across. Somewhat intense, but you also learn a ton about it. So how have we changed? I'm going to go back, Anna, to the chart that you showed where you referenced projection, competence, and integrity. Projection to me is so instant. You can project something and you can have a perception of that in seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds. You have a sense, you're selling something. You're selling who you are very quickly. And then you grow over time to competence. I'm going to demonstrate that what I projected actually was right, that I have the analytical skills, that I have the competency to do what I said I would do. And the last is integrity, which takes a long time to build up because you have to demonstrate I can do this consistently. I'm doing it from the heart. I'm doing it with a cultural perspective. In a post-COVID world, that cycle, I think, is getting quicker. I think we get to that integrity more quickly because we become more vulnerable. We want to see that end game more so than just this 30-second elevator pitch. So that's what I think we've come in the COVID environment.
That is fascinating. And listening to your career and where you started in Wall Street and what you've done, when you were younger, what was your hardest challenge when it came to, we can stick with those three parts of the model or your own? What was the hardest thing for you?
I tend to always, in my career, have excelled at the competence part, so I could do what I said I was going to do. I had trouble with the projection front, and I've been working a lot on this throughout my career. And you get to know over time, over hearing yourself speak, over getting feedback on presentations. It just takes experience to know and hear honest feedback so you can improve. And to know what things really maybe you can't change, but you have to work with them. You can't change the way you look for the most part. You can dress a little differently, maybe do your hair differently, but in some ways you look the way you look. And in a lot of ways, the projection piece can be very quickly judged by the way you look. And that's one area that over time I had to come across, and to be pretty vulnerable about it right now. One area that I've always struggled with is I appear younger than I am. And that sometimes in a corporate environment can add challenge to your integrity, can add challenge to, I am coming across with a perspective of deep experience that I know what I'm talking about. So that's just one area where over time you have to, what you have to overcome, and potentially you try to, approach those areas differently. And it's different for everybody.
I remember when I was teaching college, and I used to look a lot younger. Two kids will do this to you, and marriage for 26 years. When I was teaching college, people would always think I was the student. So I would put the glasses on and I put my hair up, and finally I just embraced it. And I would go and actually sit in the classroom before the first class even started, just so I can hear what people were saying about me. So kind of sneaky, low on the integrity scale maybe, but it helped me a little bit then. Thank you for that. So I want to talk about barriers now, because you just mentioned about, the age, because the age is a big thing. We know being a woman is a barrier as well. Kristen, I want you, if you don't mind, tell us about some barriers that you see. So barriers for people, women, men, LGBTQ, whatever you feel comfortable talking about.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can speak from the women's chamber surveys that we've done, but I know based on my experience that it's not just women that face these. So we did a survey of our members at the Colorado Women's Chamber, and we asked them what were the top 3 things that were holding women back from, getting into the highest levels of leadership, which, we're talking about executives. And they said, number 1 was, unconscious bias, corporate culture. Number 2 was communication. And number 3 was lack of mentorship and sponsorship at the very top of organizations. And I think the one that I always like to focus on when we're talking about executive presence is communication. Because when you actually, kind of disseminate that word, what it meant was how we communicate to ourselves and how we communicate on behalf of ourselves and others, right? And, you know, especially for women, you know, you deal with things like imposter syndrome and, you know, figuring out how to negotiate and how to communicate. And we're constantly told, you know, you have to behave this way to be in this environment. And oftentimes that doesn't really work for us and it's not authentic. So I think, you know, the barriers to executive presence are the way that we talk to ourselves, right? And you know, the speak that we say to ourselves in our head. I can speak, you know, for me personally, I always still to this day feel like I'm an imposter, right? I can even be, you know, if I'm being honest, right? I'm like, oh my God, look at Carl and Crystal. I'm here with them. Really? Like Anna has asked me to be here. I deal with it all the time, but sometimes there's things that come out of my mouth and I'm like, wait a minute, I actually know what I'm talking about. You know, I do have value to add, but I think for some reason we're brought up to believe so often that we don't have a place at the table. And if you're dealing with that and you're an executive, it's going to come across, right? So I think it's so important that we really, you know, focus on, you know, the words that we're saying to ourselves and on behalf of others, right? Because if you're, you know, especially if you're a woman and you don't know how to advocate on behalf of yourself, you're not going to know how to advocate on behalf of others. And the research shows that when we have women at the top in key roles in organizations, allyship is way more successful. So you have more diverse parties at the top when you have women at the top. So if we can really figure out that communication barrier, I think we can go far as executives.
And I love how you say communicate with yourself as well as outward.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you, would you mind defining allyship for us in your own words? What does that mean to you?
So for me, it means how we help lift one another up, right? Especially in the corporate environment. How do we become allies for one another? For so often, women were pitted against each other, right? Because we thought that there was only room for one of us at the top. And it's come to have an even broader meaning. Like we need to all lift one another up. We need to be allies for one another. So that goes for, you know, white men, you know, diverse populations. We need to learn how to become allies for one another in order for all of us to, you know, raise to the top or be wherever we want to be in an organization and have those choices.
Oh, that is wonderful. What a beautiful word to allyship. And I'm glad that you mentioned the imposter syndrome because I have, as Amy mentioned, I've coached hundreds of people and I have yet to work with anyone who does not feel at least a little bit of that imposter syndrome. And that is, you're right, when you're sitting in a meeting and you're waiting for security to come in and charge in with the box and say, that's it. We know you're a fraud. Now pack your stuff. I almost cussed. That's not executive presence. Pack your stuff and get the heck out of here. Almost every single person I've worked with has dealt with that. So I'm so glad you brought that up. Crystal, what about you? What are the barriers?
Yeah, very similar. It's interesting as I was thinking about this, and at first I thought, well, it's really a fine line between this self-awareness and a crippling assumption about what other people think of us. And as I thought about it, I thought, no, it's like a cliff. It's like you're racing along. I'm trying to be self-aware constantly. I'm reflecting on my presence, my confidence, my knowledge, you know, how I'm leading, how I'm portraying, all of those things. And it's very easy to fall into, and what do others think of that I'm doing versus just what I think. And then I fall off that cliff. But with Anna's help, tremendously, a big part of bringing me not completely past this. It's a journey, as Anna has said, you know, and some other therapy aspects to really tell myself those are my narratives, and I need to quiet those. And I don't. It's inappropriate for me to put thoughts into other people's minds and take them as truth. So if someone's not saying to me, you need to do this, or you're not meeting the expectation, then it isn't true just because I'm concerned about it. So I really have to, you know, remind myself, talk to myself constantly. I have a note actually right here from our time together, Anna, that says, talking to yourself is good. And I do it often, and I have to do it often in order to keep myself contained back into that. And I've been very fortunate. I've never had a female boss. I've only had male bosses all my career, but wonderful, almost all wonderful male bosses that have been supportive. Our former CEO used to tell me before every board meeting or any big meeting, be sure to speak up. So that was always, one of my barriers is I would be meek and quiet and kind, and I wanted, that's how women generally are raised to be. And so I still tell myself as we got onto this, like, I know I need to speak up and use my voice. So it's a constant journey and a constant effort.
Wow. And if any of you are lucky enough to work in the energy industry, you would have heard of Crystal. And it, without fail, whether it's a male or female, when I ask somebody, think about a leader that you respect and you'd like to emulate, her name is one of the first that is always being said. She's one of the three that I just hear constantly. So those of you that are in the energy industry will probably be surprised to hear Crystal say those same things. So thank you for that honesty. And I really appreciate that, Crystal.
It's important to share it.
Oh, it's so important. Thank you. Carl, what about you? What barriers have you found?
Sure. So I can actually give two perspectives. I can give a perspective as a closeted gay male and an openly gay male. Because as a closeted gay male, you always knew there was some barrier, and what that barrier prevented you from was being authentic. And I think authenticity is one of the cornerstones of executive presence. Feeling like you're just standing on your solid 2 feet and you're presenting something that you feel confident about. So that was one barrier, a very obvious one for me. But what's also interesting is, as a closeted gay male, I still had the outward diversity as being a white male without any diversity. And I used to use the phrase, well, I don't see race, I don't see gender, I don't see color, I just see people. And as I'm on this journey, I actually want to see that. I want to see our differences. I want to see and embrace. I work with a woman. I work with a gay man. I work with a black man, or you to talk about it, because there are differences, and we should celebrate that. That's the cornerstone of what makes us authentic. That we come from these very unique backgrounds. So removing that barrier really helped me to see we should acknowledge diversity. We should know that we don't know everything about it. We should know that we need to continue to question it, and just keep tearing down the barriers that we have against other folks who are brave enough and who have the courage to share what makes them unique. Which is why saying something like, I have a husband, I would have never been able to do that a decade ago. And now to me, it's such a big part of who I am. And now it's my objective to share that in a way to not make it a barrier anymore, to just make it an open fact and say this is just a unique area, a characteristic of who I am.
I love that. And that definitely goes towards that integrity piece. I love that. And what a lot of people don't understand is that when you hide something, you're going to invoke a threat response in the other person, and they're not even going to know why. And Carl, thank you for that openness. The humility of the you three leaders is just amazing, absolutely amazing. And Carl, while you have the floor, you're new to your company as well as to Denver. So how do you build executive presence with a blank slate?
It really started for me early on when I was interviewing for the role, because I had to do that virtually. And in this environment now, we really need to put ourselves in a different role for an interview process. An interview process is so unique in and of itself, because you have that short period of time to put forth all three of those buckets that we talked about. You have to immediately project that you're a capable person, demonstrate your competencies, and then also show that there's integrity, because we have accelerated that and we want to see that right away. So that was an initial challenge. Coming into a new role is making sure that I could interview correctly, where I thought in person I just have much more engagement. So that's an initial challenge that we had. There also was somewhat of a cultural change, with I think for me personally was so welcomed. Coming from a more, I wouldn't say results driven, but just relentlessly results driven environment, where a cultural and a personal connection just wasn't as celebrated as what I've gotten in my current company at Noodles and really in the Denver community. I've seen that across all different facets of Denver, not just from the work environment that I have the privilege of being in, but also I've reached out to mom and dad groups with my neighbors, and I've gotten tremendous welcoming feedback. There's just such a different, open cultural environment that I've seen here that I think is going to help with that acceleration of what executive presence means today.
I love that. Yeah, leadership is a team sport. It really is. And executive presence definitely is part of that. Thank you. So, Chris, I was listening to you talk about your story. I know that you've done quite a bit of work, and you started off talking about when you were even younger on executive presence. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the stuff that you've done to improve your executive presence?
Well, in addition to the help that you've given me, which I absolutely recommend to
Thank
anyone and everyone,
you.
um, it's a lot of observing others that you respect. And you used that example earlier, and I've done a lot of that to watch my supervisor, in the years past, and the way he would respond to difficult questions, questions he didn't really want to answer or had negative consequences depending on the response. And learning to um, always have a confident, as positive a possible response as you can, answer the question you want to answer, maybe versus the one that's asked when that's appropriate. So I've worked on all of those things with a lot of help along the way, for sure. And just like I said, the things that we tell ourselves and trying to defeat those. And one of the thing that I think is so important to executive presence is not authenticity, like we said, and honesty, and really about all things. I'm an avid believer that all things become easier when there's honesty. I remember back when I was like 15 years ago when I attended my first quarterly business review with the predecessor company, and several of my coworkers were so nervous about preparing for this, and I said, I know my stuff. I'm going to tell the truth. So why would I be worried? Well, he's going to take copious notes and he's going to question you on it next quarter. I'm like, and it's going to be the same truth that I told last time. I know my stuff and I'm not going to forget it, and not going to forget what I said. So I'm not really that concerned. And so I think it's just like that authenticity and knowing yourself. But you have to work to remember it and remind yourself of that often.
Wow, that is awesome. That is so great. And Carl, I know that you've done quite a bit of work on executive presence as well. What have you done?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, a lot of my work has been sort of focused on building that authenticity we talked about. And it's really starting with your why, and starting with, why are you doing what you're doing, and putting some consistent definitions about who you are as a person, as an employee, as a team member, as a leader on the page. What do you value? What do you want to stand for? What do you want to have your team, your audience take away from everything you speak, no matter what you're saying? The content of what you're saying is really only half of what people take away. The rest is just their assessment of you as a leader, as a partner, as a presenter. So understanding that and really just putting it on paper was the first step. And then it's about consistently looking at that and making sure that you're living to it. So every time you approach something, you approach it with those same consistent values. And that consistency really gets to that last bucket, which is the integrity, saying, I have the confidence to know what I stand for and who I am, and everything I do and say is going to resonate across that core value. So that's a lot of the work that I've done. It's a lot of personal work. It's a lot of personal reflection. Some of it is on your own, and then it's about taking that external and saying, give me some feedback, give me some real, honest, critical feedback about things that I'm working on, and maybe giving some direct questions to people. Hey, can you give me feedback specifically on this? Because I'm trying to work on, anything in your presentation.
And I love that. Would you feel comfortable sharing how you want to be seen has changed from when you were younger on Wall Street to who you want to be now?
Yeah, happy to. I think that when I first started, I wanted to come across as accomplished and technical and I can do it. And I think over time, while that's still important, I think we still definitely look at our leaders as results driven. And you have to have in some way presented something, proven something, accomplished, built something. That's still a big cornerstone of executive presence. What matters more is why you did it and what you stand for that put that building block in place. So that's one area that I focus on more. And it's not just about, well, I printed the spreadsheet off and I delivered this and I hit the target. It's, I did it because, you know, I have a genuine interest in our team's success, specifically this thing that I care and I'm very passionate about.
I love that. Yeah, and it's even not even only because, but it's how you did it. What I'm hearing from all three of you, and I'll use that word humility again, because I just hear that so loud from all three of you, but it's the humbleness that all of you have, that humility. How you do things, I can imagine, is just as important as those results that you get. Wonderful. Thank you. You know, we've all had instances on these Zoom meetings. If you guys are like me, I've been on Zoom calls since 6:30 this morning. It's kind of crazy. And I think probably a lot of you have been the same. And we've all had instances where like a cat will come walk across your desk. Or actually, I was in a coaching call one time and there was literally a cat climbed on top of my client's head and just sat there. And I was like, okay, I'm not quite certain how I should respond now. Or maybe your toddler's throwing a tantrum in the other room. What do you do to keep your poise during these situations? Your poise and your gravitas almost. Kristen, would you mind answering that?
You know, I think for me anyway, and it's sort of, you hear this theme, right? It's exposing such a level of vulnerability in people. I used the example, you know, when we spoke earlier about this, this colleague that I went through a leadership program with, and he had his infant on a call, and, you know, the baby was screaming, and it was such a real moment that I used it to get to know them more, right? And I think that, again, post-COVID, we're never going to go back, because the way that we're connecting with one another as a result of what's going on, it's becoming part of the conversation. I try not to ignore it, right? So if a cat's walking across the screen, what's your cat's name? Or, you know, oh my gosh, how old's the baby? Oh, what's the dog's name? You know, these are opportunities to get to know people on a deeper level that we don't have on a day-to-day basis. And it just, you know, especially for my team, it, you know, makes me so much closer to them. When we first started to get together as a team on Zoom, we took pictures of each other's workspaces and shared them with one another and talked about what we wanted to do to make them, you know, cuter. I redesigned the room that I'm in and talked to my team about it. And, you know, Anna, you even brought it up. Are you sitting in a different place now? So, I mean, I think it's giving us an opportunity to get to know each other on a deeper level and learn about families and things that I just embrace and love.
I love that. Well, I wish we can see the 200 plus people that are out there, because I would ask a question of how many of you have changed into your work yoga pants or work pajamas for this call? I know I have. Carl, what about you? What do you do to keep your poise during these situations?
Yeah. So it's interesting, as Kristen was talking, I got, you know, some reminders of my Wall Street days when it was a badge of honor to have zero distractions outside of your laser focus on your job. And the badge of honor was shown up in how many projects you worked on, how many hours did you sit in the office, how many weekends did you work, how many days consistently did you not have a break. That was a requirement. It was directly an impact on promotions and bonus. It was so impersonal. And maybe it's either the environment that I'm in or just the world has evolved so much from now. It's probably a little bit of both, but I think it's the world evolving as well, where we welcome the distractions, and it's what makes us relatable. So every time my son pops in, and knock on wood, he's not gonna run in the room right now, but it's an opportunity for me to maybe just lift him up and give him a quick shout out to the folks who I'm on the call with. And it happens. And he comes in, and he's not always coming in a great mood. He's coming in, quite frankly, you know, he needs his dad at the moment for something, because something's not going on right. And maybe, you know what? You take that break. You say, I need 5 minutes, because I've been so consistently back to back to back, because a virtual world is now also a 24/7 world, because we are always on. So you have to allow yourself to say, you know what, I have a personal life. Not only are we going to joke about it right now, but it's going to take priority in this exact moment. And those are things you just have to get around. I've had moments of that prior to COVID where it was unacceptable, frowned upon. And even me personally, I had feelings like, gosh, I wish I had that distraction walk in the room, because I'd certainly love to walk away right now in this intense meeting I'm on. I don't want to stay up all night. But we welcome that and we understand it about each other now.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it. I mean, think about it. We're in each other's living rooms right now. So it's kind of crazy. Crystal, did you want to add something to this?
I just wanted to say, as I was thinking of this, I just how remarkable the dynamic is, and as hard as the pandemic has been on all of us. If you think about if we as a society, as a nation, had tried to go to a more remote work environment, I didn't believe that it would work. And it's such a blessing in so many ways that we were baptized by fire. We were all thrown into it. We all got set up so we could actually make it happen. And it's just going to evolve into that. And so it's really, in my mind, a silver lining that we can do that and we can embrace those things. And we've gained that understanding with such compassion and empathy of the balance of our lives, so that as we go forward and we're working from home part-time or full-time, however it may look, those things are a norm. Having children come in and seeing other people's homes, it's all just going to be the new normal. And I just love that that paradigm was just shattered by something so difficult. At least there's this great silver lining as I view it.
Oh, and I love the way I love the word compassion that you used, because that is exactly what we have for one another now. Great word. And, Crystal, while we have you here and you have the floor, let's be honest, you're in an industry where boom or bust is the norm. We've had other energy executives on our executive voices before, and he's talked about it. Um, but you have to deliver sometimes really tough messages, and throughout your career, you've had to do that. What are some ways that you can still show executive presence and leadership while you're delivering those tough messages?
It goes back again to honesty and transparency and being open to sharing how we as individuals are feeling about what's happening. The energy industry um, in 2020 was quite the double, maybe triple whammy. I mean, there's the pandemic, there's the demand destruction, and then there's just at the same time, either related, somehow related, I don't know, but caused by, but this transition into renewable energy and sustainable energy, which has its impacts. And so all of those things at once has brought so much scrutiny to hiring and spending in 2020. And it was difficult times and difficult discussions. I was very proud of our executive team of just being very honest as to what we were trying to do. We're tightening strings right now because our customers are having trouble, and that's trickling up to us as well. We're trying to keep everybody that's currently employed, and so we're kind of static right now when it comes to the renewable aspects. I shared personally that it's been a transition probably over like the last 3 years that I've had to come through to let go of and work through the anger that I held around why doesn't the world appreciate what quality of life our industry provides, and I'm just feel so blessed to have come through it. I still believe those things, that we provide something valuable, but I do believe that our industry can also help solve these issues going forward. But sharing that with people, we had feedback where they said, God, it just was so helpful to hear that you were feeling that way too. And if that can help someone else, in the field or wherever, let go of that anger. And our CEO spoke about, being able to talk to his daughter and in another generation about, how this has evolved and is going to evolve, and feedback that because he mentioned that, I was able to talk to my kids more openly, from some of our employees. So it's really just, open, honest conversation that we are all sharing the same emotions about what's going on.
So that honest conversation is great. And it sounded like you had to let go of some of that anger before you could have some of that honest
Well,
conversation.
yeah, I had some angry conversations in the last
Yes,
3 years that I'm not so proud of, but they're part of it.
What are some of the things that you did to let go of that anger?
I think it was just a lot of talking through the situation with coworkers, a lot of reading, a lot of self-awareness as to where we're going, and then just acceptance and finally realizing that it wasn't feeling good for me any longer to be angry about it and complaining about it and getting heated about it, and finally coming to the realization that um, we're an industry full of very, very intelligent people that can do their part to help solve this going forward. And even there's really no progress and value in me standing here saying, you don't understand how the power gets to your light switch and it can't just change immediately. I'm not going to convince people. What's going to convince people is to try to help work through the transition, improve things, improve emissions, do our part, educate others, and in a way they can receive, because they can't receive it when I'm angry about it.
That's really mature. That's really great. And Kristen, you're shaking your head. Yeah. Does this sounding familiar? Is there anything you've seen work when you have to deliver a challenging message?
Well, first of all, I completely agree, Crystal. It's interesting, when you're talking about, creating change really in an industry, right? People want change now, but there's always a process for change. And so I was mostly nodding my head because I totally get what you're talking about, but I have gotten coached over the years on how to deal with anger. Fortunately or unfortunately, Goodwill was retail is still dominated by men at the top, which is interesting, right? J. Crew's just now starting to add more women to their boards directors because that's their customer. But it's still mostly men. And I was coached to be really careful because when I came across as angry, it shut people down. And I got some really great advice from our male CEO. He said, whether it's right or wrong, I get that you should be able to express how you feel, but I'm watching people around you and it seems like you're coming at them, right? If you have an idea, watch out. He said, you're going to get way more response to what you're wanting to happen if you ask questions. And so I could feel it. Like I feel my blood start to boil, right? I've got this like passionate thing that I need to get out there. And instead I just kind of take a breath and I ask questions. Well, what about this? Have you thought about that? Have you, and it's just, it's really, really helped me because when I get passionate about something and I think that what I'm saying is right, it comes across as anger. And instead I just ask questions and it completely just disseminates everything. And I used that a lot in my early days at the chamber.
I bet. And I love, there's a saying that I love to say, and it's when furious, get curious. Yeah, I love that saying. And
I
you're,
love that.
what a gift that he gave you. Carl, is there any, I know we're totally going off script now, but is there anything you want to add to delivering these hard messages?
On delivering the hard messages, first is really I try to put myself into that manager and direct report role, which I think has also evolved over time, particularly through more of a virtual world. I was never friends with a manager or a direct report. There was just an intangible barrier that allowed those hard messages to be easier because this was your direct report or you're just dealing with your boss. Boss is always wrong, or boss is always right, and you can never really be friends with your boss because there was that solid line. I think that that's blurred now, which makes it challenging when you have to deliver sort of the tough, real message. So the way that I've approached it is delivered it consistently, rather than having like an annual meeting where you can just say, all right, it's the annual meeting with the boss. I'm gonna get my feedback. I didn't hear anything all year, and now it's my big review, my big reveal. How did I do? You have to weave it in every single time you interact. And you have to do it subtly so it doesn't become this dynamic of I'm always mentoring, I'm always on. it's this dynamic of sort of more instant feedback, asking for it and delivering it. And the more you make it rigid and the more you make it too, I guess, too much a part of the process, the less impactful it will be. If it's organic, and I love it when it's organic, and I work with some people now, and I've worked with them, at Equinox and prior, where we just have a constant dialogue of consistent improvement. We are working on our relationship. What's going to make us the best as a team? And it's ongoing.
That is so great. And you also build that psychological safety. So if you have that connection, they're going to come to you and tell you when something's wrong or about to be wrong. I love that. What great advice, you guys. Thank you. And, we've heard throughout, I think all three of you've mentioned before about other people and how important they have been to you. And I know, like, I have a trusted group of advisors. I was looking at the people that on the participant list, and there's quite a few of them there, and including Amy on the call here. And those trusted advisors are so important to success. How about you guys? Do you have a trusted group of advisors that you go to get feedback? Kristen, you're shaking your head yes. Would you care to share?
Yeah, I do. In fact, it was the best advice I've ever been given. Nonprofits have boards of directors to ensure their success. And I had one of my mentors say, "Who's your board of advisors?" And I was like, "Oh, I have our board of directors. They're phenomenal. Love them." He goes, "No, who's Kristen's board of directors?" He goes, "And it's not just about making decisions for the chamber. It's about who you're calling when you're struggling with a decision. It's lonely at the top. And sometimes you need to have an outside network to help you problem solve." In the very beginning, my role at the chamber was my first CEO role, and talk about a tough one, right? Coming into an organization that was failing and having to deliver that message to the board. And I was the messenger they didn't know before. And there's several ways around that, right? And several ways out. And if I didn't have that board of advisors that I was advised to put together, I don't know that I would have gotten out of it. I mean, I've walked out of meetings and they're on speed dial. It's not just like, "Hey, I'm going to send them an email." Like, I text them or pick up the phone. I remember walking out of a board meeting once being really frustrated and in tears. I called one of my advisors and she picked up the phone. She was in Mexico, thank God. And she said, "What's going on?" And I said, "Oh my gosh, I'm struggling. I'm super angry right now." And she talked me off a ledge to be able to go back into the boardroom with solutions. And so there's 4 of them. And they're the ones that I go to with the most difficult of problems, either for me personally, if I'm dealing with something professionally, it doesn't matter.
How did you choose them?
They sort of came to me, right? I mean, I'm lucky enough to be connected to an incredible organization, but I meet with people a lot. And I always have, even when that wasn't a part of my job. It's been something that I've always done. And I think we all need to have that part of our role where we're just out networking and meeting with people. And as Carl alluded to, it's easy to do in Denver, but you feel that synergy when you meet them. And so it wasn't hard for me when I got that advice to come up with the list of 5. I knew who they were. They had been my advisors all along. I just formalized it. I'm like, "Okay, will you give me your cell number?"
Wow, what a great tip. So hopefully all of you that are listening are writing that down and think about your own self and who are your group of advisors. And they probably already in that role. And like Kristen, you just said, you're solidifying it. You're making it formal. Oh, wow, great. Because we all need that, because sometimes we don't realize how we're coming across. And especially as you get higher in an organization, the things you say or don't say have an even broader impact. Was there ever a time, I'll ask you this first, Carl, was there ever a time when you were unaware of how your presence, what you were saying was interpretive, and turned out it was negative?
Sure, for sure. It kind of goes back to the last point I was making about this dynamic between the manager and sort of the direct report. When I was in a leadership building role, I was constantly focused on trying to make sure that I answered my manager's question and just got it done, right? So just closed it down. And now that I'm in the manager role and growing in leadership roles, I look at my teams and I realize when I work with them and I'm saying, hey, let's talk about this solution. Let's really like spitball here. Let's think outside the box. They may be thinking, I just need to say something to get this guy like to close it down. I just need to close down this topic. And I sometimes get trapped in this. My direct reports who have a wealth of knowledge and who are deep in the weeds and can give me the answers. Sometimes I'm too much strategizing to a point where I know that they're just trying to like appease the manager. So really it's about creating an environment where I can say, let's go off the record, okay? No holds bars. This is not like right or wrong. This is an open-ended question. Take some time to think about it. But like, here's something that I am struggling with. I don't have all the answers. Sometimes I can walk into a situation and I will say something to my team and not realize that I, in my head, am trying to figure out what I want to guide and how I want to lead. And they're taking that as sort of gospel. Here is the point of view, and I got to go execute on that point of view. So it's really understanding that everything you say more in this leadership role, once you build the executive presence that you're leading a team, you have to be very careful with how you guide the team so that you don't run them off track or use them too much to help formulate your own views. You gotta take all the knowledge, speak when you need to speak, and make sure that you say what you need to say. And if you have to go off the record, go off the record. You know, chit chat, be casual, be more friendly, and think outside the box. But that's areas that I've run into some trouble. Some teams have gone off and they've said, gosh, well, we heard you say this and we need to go deliver this. And that must be the number one priority for the company right now because you're telling us this is what I'm thinking about.
So how do you know when you're doing it?
Yeah, it's tricky because the lines have blurred a little bit between how you interact with your colleagues. My interactions with colleagues have become more frequent. And I know in the Q&A, there was a question about how do we work with some of the Gen Z and Gen Xers or Gen Yers who put a little more emphasis on more frequent, informal, and shorter duration conversations. It's starting to build more of that repertoire than having more of these formal, let's have a really structured way that we're going to communicate. You can have that, but it has to be supplemented with this mentality where I can call you out of the blue and I can tell you something I'm struggling with. And I know somewhere you're going to help me think of the solution, but let's figure that out later. But you can recognize it when you are too structured and you have, once every 2 weeks or once a month meeting with some of your colleagues. And in that critical interaction time where you as a leader or the person driving the organization make a statement to this person who owns a department, that's what they may take as your priority when really you're just trying to think outside the box. And you can sort of recognize yourself doing that as you're doing it and saying, gosh, this may not be how I wanted to have spent my time. I really wanted to just have this casual dialogue, but really I just sort of took this off on a tangent a bit.
Wow. So what piece of advice do you have for any of our younger executives that are out there that are worried about this happening to them?
Yeah, I would say it's recognizing that frequent touch bases, right? More constant, consistent communication, and informal. Just reaching out, even like a chat, or a text, wherever you do more casual communication with folks. At Equinox, we all had each other's cell phones and we're texting nonstop. At Noodles, we do it through Teams chat and build this constant dialogue with folks, both on a personal level and, hey, been thinking about this, putting it on your radar. So next time we talk, maybe it's a topic for our discussion. That's how I've sort of approached it to make sure that when I do have these more formal, truly driving the business conversations, they come in with really a purpose and I can give a clear point of view because we've all thought about it and we're not just coming and saying, let's just talk about it. Let's open up the dialogue because I may not give the right guidance. I may need to process just as they're processing.
And that's good. And I like how you know that you need to process. because too many times we're uncomfortable with that silence and we don't allow people that time to process and think. So that's good. Great piece of advice as well. Wonderful. Crystal, what about you? Have you ever had a situation where things have been interpreted the wrong way?
Yeah, and this is actually, Carl, you're helping me so much right now. And I said in our prep session, and I was saying to Anna before we got on, I mean, this is exactly what like my new struggle is right now, which is I came up or kind of grew up with this team the last 10 years before I switched jobs, and we were working very collaboratively. And so leading that group just continued in that collaboration. We just had different responsibilities. Then I move over into this new position with a team who doesn't know me in the same way. And I went into it thinking I could behave the same. And this is exactly what happened. And unfortunately, one of my reports said to me, you need to think about the weight your words hold and the position that you're in now, and that you are running people. You're not intending it, you don't even realize it, but people are taking what you say and running this way, running that way, when I really am just trying to collaborate through the solution because I enjoy doing that with them. And an hour ago, I was telling Anna I'm struggling with this, and you've just given me the answer. I feel like if I can say, let's just talk about this, let's just brainstorm around this before I do the talking, and try to, put that on the side table so that it's not a directive. It's a, we're just talking, we're just collaborating. This is not that, and be clear about it. Maybe my problem is at least partially solved. So I really appreciate that.
Way to go, Carl. And so, Kristen, I know sometimes things can get emotionally charged. Has there ever been a time that you feel comfortable sharing where there's been a situation where perhaps your executive presence was challenged some because of being so emotionally charged? And if so, do you feel comfortable sharing with us?
Sure. Yeah, of course, right? All the time. There was an instance when I was the chief marketing officer at Goodwill, and the organization, I didn't know it at the time, but the organization was going through the process of potentially merging with another organization, and it was putting a tremendous amount of stress on the CEO, and I didn't know. And I was getting incredibly frustrated because I kept offering up solutions that I knew could get us out of trouble financially, and they kept getting, pushed back. And I had, as I always do in our executive meetings, had said one of those, and the CEO did what he always did and blew me off. And I guess I didn't know it, but I guess I rolled my eyes at him. And he was so pissed at me. He jumped up and I can't even really remember what he said, but he was pissed. There were words, and he ran into his office. And I looked at the other executives at the table, and they said, you rolled your eyes at him. Shouldn't have done that. Because I was completely caught off guard. I was like, wait, I always say that. What, and it was really kind of scary too, right? I was nervous. I didn't want to evoke that kind of stress in someone that I cared very deeply about for an organization that I loved working for. And I think for me, I could have gone into the place where I was a victim. Well, he yelled at me. That's totally unacceptable. But what he was really doing was being real, and I had hurt him. And so what I had to do was go into his office and have a really good, honest conversation about what was going on and how he felt. And so I had to take a little bit of a time out before I did that. And so I actually, left the office and sort of debriefed with advisors, and went back and had a really good conversation with him in a glass of wine. So yeah, so I mean, it was really good, but scary and unnerving and really difficult.
Well, that took a lot of courage too.
Mhm.
Wow. Well, we have come to the part of our program where we want your nuggets. So if you wouldn't mind, before we get into the Q&A, which we're going to get into in a minute. So if you have any questions for the panelists, please put them in the Q&A. But before we do that, would each one of you mind sharing a piece of advice for other people who want to improve their executive presence? Let's see, why don't we just stay with the same? Carl, would you mind starting us off?
Sure, happy to. Again, it goes back to really understanding your why. To start, write it down. Write down why you're doing what you're doing. Keep it simple. Continue to develop it, and then define how you want to come across. Not the words you're saying, not the content that will come, right? Because we all have knowledge base and we all have built experience. We should feel confident that we can share that. But how do you want to come across? You want to come across as a trusted advisor? Do you want to come across as sincere, as genuine, empathetic, results driven, challenging? You want to push your team. What is it that you want to come across? And then just live that every day. Live it. Remind yourself that as you speak, as you work with teams, live it every day, not just in the meetings you have, but in how you even set up your interactions, set up your cadence of interactions with people virtually, and when we can do it in person, so that you have a very consistent approach. You can do it in a way that, in everything you do in the process that you march down brings that same delivery, and you can be authentic. The crux of it for me is having sort of no barriers on authenticity. That's really going to resonate the most with people.
Oh, that is wonderful. And so, Carl, I love what you're saying, because I have all of my executive coaching clients choose their leadership brand. So they have to choose 2 words or phrases of how they want to be perceived, and they have to live it. If any of you out there would like a list, it's not all inclusive by any means, but I have a list that I have people start with to look at. Feel free to email me and I'm happy to share that with you. Great nugget, Carl. Crystal, how about you?
You stole my thunder because I was going to use one of my brands.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so
okay.
like this. Sorry.
I would say, remember that if this is a journey, so don't beat yourself up for missteps. Just be resilient and get back on the path. Just take another step forward. Be honest, be growth oriented, which was one of my, what did you call it? I don't know what you called it now. My brands, and humility. Remember, I saw something actually posted today about humility, and that is that humility being defined as the ability to continue learning despite how much we already know. And so continue to learn, and you can't learn if you're not listening. And that's something that I'm continuing to work on every day, is to be listening more than I'm talking, because that's a very bad habit that I have, is to talk more than I listen. And just, it's kind of a two-sided thing, right? It's be forgiving with yourself, be easy on yourself, but drive yourself as well, to be continually growing and developing and accelerating your executive presence and your confidence. And it's not only just for your business persona, it's for your personal aspects as well. And that's such a beautiful thing, that all of that's kind of coming together through this experience. I think we talked before about my lines are so blurred now between who I was at work, and I could stand up taller and look stronger and walk into work, and this is my work mode, and then come home and love my children. Well, it's all kind of happening at the same time now. And I think that's a great thing for all of us to embrace and remember about one another.
What a great way to look at what we just went through, or we're still going through. Thank you. Kristen, how about you? What advice do you have?
Well, I think know that you can't do it alone. I have seen a lot of executives that, they don't have that growth mindset, right? It's just, I'm in this role, I have it for a reason, and I'm going to do it. And I think, I have to say it, I mean, I got a coach, and it really changed the world for me, both personally and professionally. Oftentimes there's this argument of like, are leaders, born, or are we, grown? Are we created over time? I believe that we're created over time, and that we're consistently recreating, right? And I don't think that you can grow alone. You need some sort of support system. I'm reading a book right now called Mindset. And it's all about that, right? It's about the fact that, you can shift your mindset and always come from a growth perspective instead of being stuck here, right? And I think it's super important for leaders to have the ability to shift their mindset and continuously change. And the best way to do that, I think, is through having that coach so that you can self-reflect.
Oh, that is wonderful. Thank you. Gosh, great advice. And let's turn to Q&A now. Amy, I believe you were going to tell us what questions we have for the panelists.
I absolutely can. So the one just came in from Emily that I think is a real quick answer we can have. Can we get Anna's email and get her list, or is it possible to add it to the chat? Absolutely. At the end of this, we will, of course, get you Anna's contact information, and and if our panelists allow, their contact information as well, so that you can reach out and get any answers to any additional questions and get that list. So yes, we will be sending that out. And then also, I want to make sure we fully address a question that we got. I know that part of it was answered a little bit by Carl, but I want to dig in with each panelist. How have each of you tailored your online leadership presence based on what you've learned from Gen X, Y, and Zers, who are usually more comfortable virtually? So, what I might do is just pick on Kristen, because you're the first person in my bubble, and just say, how have you adjusted for each of the generations, and what are you seeing?
Um, I kind of want to answer that twofold. First of all, digitally and online, I would not have been able to shift if I didn't have individuals that work with me that understand that world very well. So, bit of role reversal for me, right? Listen, do what they tell me to do. I mean, that was my first piece of advice. I listened to my employees and I put it in their hands. We had to take all of our programming and move it to a digital world within 2 days. And so I really relied heavily on my millennial employees to do that and to actually do what they told me to do. You're going to facilitate this, you're doing this, this is how you're going to be. So I think it was wonderful. And I think it was a wonderful opportunity for them to shine. I think the need for more frequent touch bases. I really appreciate what Carl says. I pick up the phone and call all of my employees all the time now instead of like formal meetings, but we also started out with daily touch bases, and we'd have our hair in a bun and drinking coffee, but we definitely touched base at least once a day in the beginning to be able to stay connected, and that was huge. I really, really valued that. And now it's on every single team meeting, our formal ones. Like we do a check-in. There needed to be a mental health check-in, because I think, while millennials and the younger generations are better online, the shift of mental health and the impact that COVID is having on individuals is really intense right now. And I believe that it's a really hardworking workforce, and they're throwing themselves into things and getting really burnt out. And so I've been mindful of making sure that we have mental health breaks and that we're still connecting. Even we have a small team, so we can do this. We do connect in person too, just for fun. We miss that, right? We don't go to the work happy hours anymore, right? So in the beginning, we were doing COVID happy hours, like Friday afternoon, we're having wine, guys. Like, this is really important right now. So those are some of the ways that I've been doing it.
That's very helpful. Crystal, would you like to add anything about what you're seeing with the different generations, especially considering that right now we have a generation where this is their very first work experience. Their first job may be this year.
Yeah, which is so challenging to onboard at all in this environment, let alone in a first position. So I think encouraging them to have the interaction and have the face-to-face. Certainly, we are relying on the skill sets of our younger generations, which is we don't have a ton of in oil and gas. I think that's a well-known fact, and we're working toward drawing additional folks in to our industry from younger generations. And I think this actually is very helpful that we are moving the platform. Like Kristen said, it was 2 days and we had to be on this platform. And as I mentioned before, with the just total breaking of the paradigm, that's caused us and even beyond my age to adapt very quickly. And so it kind of has maybe not leveled the playing field quite, but brought us closer together where we have that commonality. So that has been great. And then I do think just the support. I think the younger generations have come up in this period where we've had many luxuries in our world. We haven't had a lot of hardships, if you will. We barely remember, those of us here, we hear it from our parents, waiting in line for gas, or we haven't had power, rolling blackouts in quite some time, and those sort of aspects. And so, the pandemic is kind of a shocked for, instances that are going on right now. So just continuing to check in on our employees and make sure everyone has the support that they need.
Lisa, and Carl, we do have a few more minutes. We would love to hear more of your perspective on this, especially considering that at Noodles, you do have a very diverse population as far as maybe some people just entering the workforce, as well as some, folks who may be already at retirement age. So how are you adjusting your leadership style with who your audience is?
That's absolutely right. At Noodles, we are really celebrating diversity and inclusion. It's a really great place to be in terms of seeing that really broad spectrum. As I was looking at this question, here's what actually I was thinking about. If I was to rewind the clock five years ago, maybe a little longer, there was such a divide between millennial and boomer. It was a meme. It was a joke, right? There was okay boomer. There was millennials just want to travel and quit, and they don't want to work, and they want to be CEO overnight, right? And I think that divide, like so many other things, and we've talked about this, has just begun to crumble. And there's not as much of a, how do I have to cater to a millennial because they need to be catered to this, and how does a millennial work with a boomer or a different generation? I've seen that I almost say we don't need to cater or I have not had to cater as specifically anymore to that generation as I used to. I think there was just such a perception about what would it take to motivate a millennial, and how does an older or boomer generation, what's their work style differential? I see it as right now, we all got to be tech, right? We got to be tech savvy. Got to make sure if you want to share your screen, share your screen. There's no excuses anymore. We've been virtual for a year. Got to put the investment in there and figure it out. And I'm going to partially laugh at myself because it took me 5 extra minutes to find the Zoom link request for this meeting, but it's true. You have to get that tech savviness. I love what Kristen said about, frequent meetings, calling up, picking up, getting the phone. And really, when I think about talking to anyone now, not just millennials, Gen Zers, boomers, whatever, it's about getting to know everybody on a personal level. Just adding that one additional nugget of personal connection can drive you through your entire career working together. It can be what fosters it. So that was kind of my spin on the question. The divide has come down a little bit.
I like your spin on the question. And I do want to let Mike know we did get your question. It is a complicated one. And so what we're going to do is take your question and I'm going to give each panelist a bit of homework to maybe give their take on that. And we will be getting back to you with 3 very unique answers because we are at time. So we will take the rest of the questions and make sure they are addressed very, very well and timely. Anna, I'm going to turn this back over to you to close out our meeting.
Thank you. And gosh, you guys, the panelists, thank you so much. It is just what a wonderful conversation. And not just now, but hopefully you will reach out to the panelists if you want to talk to them. Amy and Amanda, if you have any questions about benefits, or even if you just want a lively conversation. If you're looking for any learning and development, reach out to me. I'm happy to give you any information at all about that. Other than that, thank you guys so much. And we look forward to the next Executive Voices event. Have a wonderful day.